I'm sorry, but we can't help you. We have a trip booked. Those 9 words. They didn't just hang in the air, they seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the sterile hospital hallway. That is what my parents said to me when I asked them to co-sign. Not pay, just co-sign. For a loan so my daughter could get emergency spinal surgery. My 18-year-old daughter, Issa, was lying in a bed 50 feet away with a fractured spine, facing the very real possibility of permanent paralysis. 3 days later, while I was counting coins and begging strangers on the internet, my parents boarded a $14,000 luxury cruise to the Mediterranean with my sister and her children. They posted photos of champagne toasts while I signed consent forms with a shaking hand. I didn't yell at them. I didn't beg. I didn't even reply to the text message my mother sent from the departure lounge. But I remembered. I remembered every syllable. And exactly 2 weeks later, I stood in front of their manicured lawn holding a manila envelope that was about to rip their entire world apart. My name is Helen. I'm 36 years old. I have paid my own bills since I was 19. I helped my parents with theirs for years when my dad was between jobs. But the one time I needed a signature, just a signature on a dotted line, they told me they couldn't tie their names to something like that. Something like that being the surgery that saved their granddaughter's ability to walk. So I didn't scream. I took notes. And when the truth about what they had stolen finally came to light, I didn't warn them. I served them. To understand the magnitude of the betrayal, you have to understand the night the world ended. It was a Thursday. The kind of Thursday that feels mundane until it isn't. I was making dinner, waiting for Isa to come home from her shift at the library. She was saving up for college textbooks. The call didn't come from Isa. It came from a police officer. She had been in the passenger seat. Her friend was driving. They were belted in, obeying the speed limit, doing everything right. But you can do everything right and still lose when a drunk driver blows a red light at 60 miles per hour. The next few hours were a blur of terrifying sensory inputs. The smell of burnt rubber on the officer's uniform when I arrived at the scene, the blinding white lights of the emergency room, the beep of monitors that sounded like a countdown. Issa's face was bruised, purple and yellow blooming across her cheekbone, but she was conscious. She was scared. "I can't feel my toes, Mom," she whispered. Her voice was so small. It sounded like she was 5 years old again, asking for water in the middle of the night. "Why can't I feel my toes?" The doctors stabilized her. They ran scans. They spoke in hushed tones behind curtains. By Saturday morning, the lead neurosurgeon, a man with tired eyes and steady hands, gave us the news. "There is significant compression on the spinal cord," he said, pointing to the ghostly gray images on the light board. "We have a window. A small one." He laid out 2 options. Option A, the standard procedure. Covered by our basic state insurance. It involved fusing a large section of the spine. It would limit her mobility for life, leaving her stiff and prone to chronic pain. Worse, due to the swelling, the statistical likelihood of nerve damage during the procedure was high. About 20%. A 1 in 5 chance my daughter would never walk again. Option B, an advanced, minimally invasive reconstruction. It used titanium spacers and a synthetic graft. High success rate, low risk of paralysis, almost full mobility recovery. "We do option B," I said immediately. Obviously. The surgeon looked down at his clipboard. "There's a problem, Helen. That procedure is considered elective by your provider because the other option is technically viable. It's not covered. The hospital requires an upfront payment or a secured financing plan before we can book the OR suite for that specific equipment." "How much?" $42,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had savings, but I'm a single mom working as a paralegal. I had maybe $6,000 accessible. "I'll get the money," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. "Schedule it. We need the financial clearance by 4 p.m. today for surgery tomorrow morning," he said gently. "Or we have to proceed with option A to prevent permanent damage." I stepped into the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened my laptop on a hard plastic chair and applied for an emergency medical loan. Denied. I applied for another. Approved. But only for $15,000, and the interest rate was predatory. I needed the full amount. I needed a co-signer with high net worth to unlock the rest. I stared at the phone. My parents. My parents lived in a 4-bedroom house in a gated community. They drove new cars. They played golf 3 times a week. We weren't close. Emotionally, we were miles apart. But we were family. And this was Isa. Their first grandchild. The girl they sent birthday cards to. The girl whose graduation they had attended 3 months ago. I dialed my dad. "Hey, kiddo!" His voice was booming, cheerful. "What's going on?" "Dad, it's Isa," I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. "She's in the hospital. It's bad." I explained everything. The accident. The paralysis risk. The 2 surgeries. The $42,000 gap. I have a loan lined up. I explained, talking fast. But I need a cosigner to get the full amount released by this afternoon. You wouldn't have to pay a cent. I'll make the payments. I just need your credit score to back me up. Please. The line went quiet. I could hear the faint sound of a TV in the background. A game show. Dad? That's a lot of money, Helen, he said finally. The cheer was gone, replaced by a guarded tone I knew well. It's her spine, Dad. It's her ability to walk. Are you sure the insurance won't cover it? Have you appealed? My mom's voice chimed in from the background. She was on speaker. There is no time for an appeal, Mom. The surgery needs to happen tomorrow morning. The clock is ticking on her spinal cord. Another pause. Longer this time. The timing is just really unfortunate, my dad said, his voice smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man negotiating a refund on a toaster. What do you mean? We leave Monday, Mom said. The Mediterranean cruise. With Megan and the kids. We've been planning this for a year. I know, I said, confused. But I don't need you to be here physically. I can email the document. You can e-sign it. It takes 5 minutes. It's not the time, Helen, Dad said. It's the liability. We're about to retire. We can't have a $40,000 debt hanging over our credit if you miss a payment. And honestly, we don't want the stress right now. We need this vacation. The resort won't refund us after the 7-day mark. That's $14,000 we'd lose if we get dragged into a financial mess. My brain stopped working for a second. I couldn't process the equation he had just presented. You're worried about the resort refund? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Dad, Isa could end up paralyzed. We are talking about her legs. Her life. You're being unfair, Dad snapped. We aren't doctors. If the insurance says the other surgery is fine, it's probably fine. You always dramatize things. I'm not asking for your medical opinion, I said, tears finally spilling over, hot and angry. I am asking for your signature. I am asking you to help your granddaughter. We can't do it, Helen. We just can't tie our names to something like that right now. We have the trip booked. And then the kicker. My mom added, maybe you should have saved more for emergencies. We told you being a single mother would be hard. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't scream. I just pressed the red button and stared at the screen until it went black. For the first time in my life, I realized my parents weren't just selfish. They were willing to cannibalize their own family's future to preserve their comfort. They looked at my daughter's potential paralysis and saw a threat to their credit score and their sunset wine tastings. I sat on the bench outside the ER entrance. A pigeon was pecking at a discarded wrapper near my foot. It was missing a toe. I watched it limp and thought, I am on my own. But then a shift happened. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a mother. And a mother does not let her cub die, or lose her legs. Because the rest of the pack is useless. I opened my laptop. I wiped my face. I stopped crying. I went to work. I emailed everyone. I swallowed my pride and messaged former coworkers, church acquaintances, old college roommates. I posted a breakdown of the costs on my social media, not with a sob story, but with facts, specifics. Isa needs surgery in 12 hours. The gap is $27,000. Here is the Venmo. I called the loan officer back. I'll take the high-interest loan. Give me the $15,000. That left $12,000. The kindness of strangers is a terrifying, beautiful thing. A woman I hadn't spoken to since high school wired me $200 without a question. Isa's old ballet teacher dropped off an envelope with $500 cash. A single mom in Texas, who followed me on Instagram for my paralegal tips, sent $15. It's not much, she wrote, but I'm praying. By 10 p.m., I was still short. I was sitting on the floor of the waiting room, cross-legged, staring at a spreadsheet I'd made to keep myself sane. Then, the door opened. It was Mrs. Gable, the mother of Isa's best friend since kindergarten. She walked in, looking disheveled in a raincoat over pajamas. She sat down next to me and handed me a credit card. It has a $20,000 limit, she said. Use what you need. I tried to push it back. I can't. I don't know when I can pay you back. She shook her head, closing my fingers around the plastic. You're a good mom, Helen. Let someone be good to you. Isa is like a daughter to me. Fix her. We paid in full before midnight. I signed the consent forms. I watched them wheel Isa away the next morning. And, while she was under the knife, I saw a notification on Facebook. My mother had checked in at the airport. Caption: First class to the Mediterranean. #blessed #family vacation. I didn't block them. I needed to see it. I needed to burn the image of their happiness into my retinas so I would never ever forget what they chose. The surgery was a success. Isa woke up. She wiggled her toes. She cried. I cried. We spent 10 days in the hospital. Every day, I watched my parents' vacation unfold online. The buffet dinners. The sunsets. My sister Megan commenting, "Love you guys. Wish I was there." Megan, the golden child, who hadn't called me once to ask if Isa was alive. I was discharged with Isa on a Tuesday. We went home. I set her up in the living room because she couldn't do stairs yet. That night, around 2 a.m., I was standing by the kitchen window, watching the streetlights when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was an email from Greg. Greg was my late grandmother's attorney. He was an old school guy. Leather suspenders, office smelling of cigars and mahogany. He had adored my grandmother, Margaret. Grandma Margaret passed away 6 months ago. We were told she left very little. Just some sentimental items. My parents, the executors and trustees, had handled everything. The subject line read URGENT. Discrepancies regarding the trust. I opened it. "Helen, I've been trying to reach your parents for weeks regarding the transfer of the Margaret Vance Trust, but they aren't returning my calls. I just saw a social media post that they are out of the country. I am contacting you because as of Isa's 18th birthday 6 months ago, she is the sole beneficiary." I frowned. Sole beneficiary. I called him. It was late, but he answered on the first ring. "Helen," Greg said, his voice gravelly and serious. "I'm glad you called. Something is wrong." "What do you mean, Greg?" "Mom and Dad said Grandma didn't leave any money. Just the furniture." Greg was silent for a long moment. "Helen, Margaret left everything to Isa. Everything. The house in the hills, the stock portfolio, the antique coin collection. It was all placed in a trust. Your parents were merely trustees. Their only job was to manage the assets until Isa turned 18. At that point, full control and ownership were supposed to transfer to her immediately." I felt the room spin. "How much, Greg?" "The portfolio alone is valued at roughly $400,000. The house is another 600. With the coins, we're looking at over $1 million in assets." I gripped the counter. "But Isa turned 18 6 months ago. We haven't seen a dime. My parents, they've been renovating their kitchen. They bought a new car for Megan. They went on this cruise. That's what I was afraid of." Greg said, his voice turning cold. "I checked the accounts this morning. There have been significant withdrawals. Large cash transfers to personal accounts held by your father. They never notified the bank of Isa's birthday. They never filed the transfer paperwork. They stole it." I whispered. "That's not just unethical, Helen," Greg said. "That is grand larceny. That is embezzlement. That is a breach of fiduciary duty of the highest order. If they spent beneficiary funds on themselves, they are going to prison." The pieces clicked into place. The sudden remodel. The luxury handbags my mom had been flaunting. The $14,000 cruise. They didn't just refuse to help with Isa's surgery. They refused to help her using her own money. They let her risk paralysis because they were too busy spending her inheritance on upgrading their lifestyle. They were drinking cocktails paid for by the grandmother who loved Isa more than they ever did. "Greg," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like holiness. "What do we do?" "We file," Greg said. "And we don't play nice." My parents were due back on a Sunday evening. I tracked their flight like it was a NASA launch. Every layover, every delay. I knew exactly when their wheels touched the tarmac. I didn't tell Isa everything yet. I just told her we had to go see Grandma and Grandpa. "I don't want to talk to them," she said softly, adjusting the brace around her torso. "You won't have to. I promised. You just have to sit in the car and watch." We parked across the street from their house. It was a beautiful evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across their perfect lawn. A lawn maintained by a service paid for, I now knew, with Isa's money. 10 minutes later, a town car pulled up. My parents stepped out. They looked tan, rested, glowing with the health that only money and lack of conscience can buy. My mother was wearing a flowing white linen dress and a sun hat. My dad was lugging suitcases that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. They didn't notice us. They were laughing about something. I opened my car door. "Stay here," I told Isa. I walked across the street. My heels crunched on their gravel driveway. The sound made my mother turn. She froze. The smile dropped off her face instantly. "Helen, what are you doing here?" I didn't stop walking until I was 5 feet away. I held out the thick manila envelope. "What is this?" she asked, looking at it like it was a bomb. "Welcome home," I said, my voice dead flat. "You've been served." My dad looked up from the trunk. "Helen, don't start a scene. We're tired. We just got back." "I know," I said. "I hope the cruise was worth it. Greg tells me the trust fund is looking a little light." The color drained from my father's face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. My mother let out a strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. You spoke to Greg?" Dad stammered. "I did. And the forensic accountant."
and the district attorney. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. You stole from her. You let her lie in a hospital bed terrified of being crippled while you spent her money on room service. It's a misunderstanding. Mom shrieked, finding her voice. We were managing it. We were holding it for her own good. You know how irresponsible teenagers are. She's 18, I said. And she's not the one who spent 50 grand on a kitchen remodel that isn't hers. I turned around. See you in court, Helen. Wait. My dad took a step toward me. We're family. I spun back around. No. Family is the people who showed up. Family is the stranger who sent me $15. You're just defendants. I got in the car. Isa was watching, her eyes wide. I put the car in drive and didn't look back. The next few weeks were a war of attrition. My sister Megan texted me the next day. Mom and Dad are devastated. How could you do this? They were going to give it to her eventually. You're tearing the family apart over money. I replied with a single photo. Isa's spinal x-ray showing the titanium rods. Then I blocked her. Greg wasn't kidding about the evidence. It was overwhelming. They hadn't even tried to be clever. They treated the trust like a personal piggy bank. Withdrawals for car payments, grocery bills, the cruise, golf club memberships. They had burned through nearly $150,000 in 6 months. We went to mediation first. It's a standard step to try and settle before full trial, but my parents showed up looking like ghosts. They had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. They wore simple clothes, trying to look humble. Their lawyer, a sweaty man who looked like he knew he was losing, did most of the talking. My clients admit to some administrative errors, he said. They are willing to return the remaining funds and set up a payment plan for the spent amount over the next 10 years. I looked at Isa. She was sitting at the head of the table. She was wearing a blazer over a t-shirt, her back brace hidden underneath, but her posture was steel. No, Isa said. Everyone looked at her. I don't want a payment plan, she said, her voice clear and cold. I want every single penny back. Now, I want the house transferred to my name by Friday. I want the coin collection returned. And I want the money you spent on the cruise. With interest. Isa, honey, my mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. We didn't mean to hurt you. We love you. Isa looked at her grandmother. You love the money more. You were on a boat while Mom was begging strangers for cash to fix my spine. You had the money to help. My money. And you said no because you didn't want to ruin your credit score. She leaned forward. This isn't revenge. It's restitution. And if you don't agree to full repayment immediately, we go to trial. And Mom says if we go to trial, the DA presses criminal charges. My dad slammed his hand on the table. You ungrateful little. We raised your mother. We bought you Christmas presents. And you stole my inheritance, Isa shot back.
We're done here. They refused the settlement. They thought we were bluffing. They thought family would protect them from consequences. They were wrong. The civil trial was short. The judge looked at the trust documents, looked at the bank statements, and practically threw the book at them. He ordered full repayment plus punitive damages. They had to sell their house, their actual house, not the one in the trust. To pay Isa back, they lost their cars. They lost their country club membership. But the criminal trial, that was where the real justice happened. Because the amount stolen was over $100,000, and because it involved a breach of fiduciary duty, the district attorney charged them with embezzlement and grand theft. Initially, due to their age and lack of prior record, it looked like they might get probation and community service. I was preparing myself for that. I told Isa, at least we got the money back. But my parents, they just couldn't help themselves. A week before the sentencing hearing, Greg called me. You might want to sit down, he said. What now? They tried to hide assets. Again, it turned out, anticipating the seizure of their assets, my dad had transferred $80,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under my aunt's name without her knowing. He thought he was being slick. He thought the forensic accountants wouldn't look that deep. He was wrong. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was fraud. This was concealment of assets. This was a direct insult to the court. The sentencing hearing was brutal. The judge was a woman with sharp glasses and zero patience for greed. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, she said, looking down at them. You stole from a vulnerable beneficiary, who was your own flesh and blood. You ignored her medical crisis to fund a vacation. And when caught, you attempted to defraud this court to hide what little you had left. Your arrogance is staggering. My mother was sobbing. My dad was staring at the floor, his hands shaking. I sentence you to 1 year in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. You are to report immediately. The sound of the gavel striking the wood echoed like a gunshot. 1 year. Real prison, not house arrest. I watched the bailiff handcuff them. My mother looked at me, her mascara running, eyes pleading. Helen, do something. I didn't move.
Yeah.
I felt Isa's hand take mine. I squeezed it. I can't help you, I whispered, though they couldn't hear me through the glass partition. I have a life to live. It's been 6 months since they went away. The house they lived in was sold to pay back the trust. Issa now owns Grandma Margaret's house in the hills. She moved in last month. It's a beautiful place, full of light. She's turned one of the rooms into a physical therapy studio. She's walking. She's running, actually. The titanium in her spine holds her up. But it's her spirit that keeps her standing. She took the money they tried to steal, and started what she calls the compound project. She invested the bulk of it. She set up a college fund for herself. And she donated $42,000, the exact cost of the surgery, to a fund that helps uninsured families pay for emergency procedures. We don't visit the prison. We don't accept the collect calls. Megan tried to guilt us into it for the first few months, but eventually, even she went quiet when the extent of their lies came out. Some people tell me I went too far. They say they're your parents. You don't send your parents to jail. But I look at my daughter. I watch her walk across the room without pain. I think about the night I sat on that hard plastic chair, counting minutes, wondering if she would ever walk again while my parents sipped wine on a deck overlooking the Mediterranean. Silence wasn't strength that night. Silence was survival. But the noise we made afterward, that was strategy. Issa signed the final legal document closing the case last week. Under her signature, she wrote a small note in the margin just for herself. Some people don't deserve forgiveness. They just deserve consequences. Too far? Or just far enough? You tell me. Because I sleep soundly at night. And for the first time in a long time, so does my daughter. Sometimes walking away isn't a weakness. It's the start of power. And sometimes justice is just an envelope delivered at sunset, watching the people who betrayed you realize that their vacation is officially over.